This episode of Mission Log is brought to you by the official Star Trek Starships collection. Get the Enterprise D for only $4.95 when you sign up today at st-starships.com/missionlog.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 214, Imaginary Friend.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Ken Ray. Each week on Mission Log. Mission Log. Hang on, I'll do it.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Nobody can hear you.
What do you mean?
You're not real.
You know, I always suspected that.
Each week on Mission Log, we watch an episode of Star Trek, taking it apart for messages, morals, ideas, and ideals, and seeing whether the episode stands the test of time.
This week, Imaginary Friend, or as I like to call it, You People. Actually, this is the one where young Clara Sutter has a pretend friend come to life with a negative side effect or two. In a moment, John will bring us trivia, but first, tons of ships off the starboard bow, John.
I like how you phrased that, right? Tiny ships for a big galaxy. It's the official Star Trek Starships collection. Here's how you do it. You subscribe to the official Star Trek Starships collection, and you get 2 ships a month, from the original series through the Kelvin timeline and beyond. It's not just the ships you get, though. You also get a magazine filled with production notes, design notes, and in-universe information about the ship. Plus, you get a digital download of the magazine, which not only gives you access to even more information online, it lets you keep the physical magazine as close to new as possible. And you get all of that for $20 per ship, 2 ships a month, 2 magazines a month, 2 digital magazines a month, $40 a month.
Plus, you get extra surprises the longer you stay subscribed. And you can start your subscription at a crazy low price. Get the Enterprise 1701D, home to such imaginary friends as Minuet, Isabella, Minuet, and of course, Minuet. Get the Enterprise D and its accompanying magazine for $4.95 to try it out. And can I just point out something that we've actually not talked about quite as much lately as we used to?
Sure.
We love these ships.
Yes. Yeah. So, when I have my imaginary ship battles with my imaginary crew, I reach for the Eagle Moss Starship collection.
Well, of course you do. Why would you not? But, I mean,
right.
we haven't talked as much lately about just, like, seriously, the joy that I get from my Klingon bird of prey.
Yeah.
I mean, they really, we've been talking a lot about the talking points and the quick points and all that stuff. These things just sit on my desk facing me, like, in everything that I do. And I just look up, and especially the bird of prey, but all of the ships that they send, I just absolutely love them.
I think it would be a different thing if it was just sort of like a toy, you know?
Right.
Because there have been a lot of toy spaceships that have come out over the years, as long as Star Trek has been around. But these sort of, they look very professional. Like, you know, when you see somebody's corporate desk and, like, you know, you're at the Boeing factory and they got the nice, you know, airplane model on the desk, and you go, wow, that's a really nice study of this thing that's what these look like. They look super professional, really nice, just an elegant way to express your fandom. And the longer you say subscribe, you'll have 1 million of them.
That's true. 1 million, you will need a bigger house at some point.
So the address to participate in that, to figure out why it is that Ken and I love our teeny tiny starships so much, you can get started too at st-starships.com/missionlog. st-starships.com/missionlog. Trying it out not only supports this show, it makes you the commander of your own personal armada.
That address again is st-starships.com/missionlog. And a big thanks to Eagle Moss for sponsoring this week's show. I want to tell people how to get in touch with us before you tell people about all of the trivia that ever was ever.
All of it.
All of it. This is it. Mm-hmm. This is the last week, sadly, of trivia. And strap in, because this is from now on podcast. Mission Log Pod is the address to find us on Facebook, Skype, and Twitter. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, we would love to hear your voice. 323-522-5641 is the phone number to call. 323-522-5641. Our email address is missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our show website, including discovered documents, is at missionlogpodcast.com. And please remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log. And John, in the middle of that, I was thinking maybe we save all of the trivia ever for next week. And today we just do trivia for Imaginary Friend.
Okay. All right. I'll have to cut it down by about 3.5 hours. So today's episode, Imaginary Friend, was written by Jean-Louise Matthias, Ronald Wilkerson, and Richard Flegel. Now, out of this group of contributors, Jean-Louise had a total of 5 stories produced on Next Gen, and she has 2 more coming up on Voyager. These are her only professional writing credits. Ronald Wilkerson, similar thing, though he has 1 more Trek credit and then goes on to write some for Stargate SG-1. He and Jean-Louise worked together, so no surprise there that they would cross over on the TNG episodes that they worked on. And finally, Richard Flegel is credited as well in his only next-gen credit here, but he has written other screenplays, novels, and plays, and has been a longtime associate dean at USC in their College of Letters. Now, the teleplay for this episode is by Edith Swenson and Brannon Braga. Edith had some solid credits before adding Next Gen to her resume. She had written numerous Tales from the Dark Side, Monsters, then went on to Charmed. Are you noticing a pattern here? Well, once the original drafts for this episode had been batted around and the final assignment was given to Brannon Braga, it was Brannon who wanted to bring in a creepy element. The story was originally to have featured a friendly alien, a benevolent little child, kind of along the lines of like E.T. or something, but he really wanted to play up the scary, so Edith Swenson brought in the same kind of sensibility with her background. The episode was directed by Gabrielle Beaumont. We met British-born, highly experienced TV director Gabrielle with her first Next Gen episode. It was a 2-word title. Booby Trap.
Okay.
That was it.
Booby Trap, you say?
Yeah, it was. Booby Trap was her first episode.
Booby Trap was.
Sure was.
Okay.
And most recently, we saw her work in Disaster. She also directed Suddenly Human, another episode which prominently featured a child guest star. Now, Ken, remember that time we went through the Mare Obscura Nebula, and it also did weird things to the Enterprise, like making walls disappear and cutting crew members in half when they got embedded in the floor? Well, that nebula footage was reused here, colored a little differently, and sometimes the film flipped around just to make it look that much more different. And
Wait a minute. Wait a minute, though. Wasn't that also the Matara Nebula?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was the Matara Nebula. So we got a double dose.
So you're going to reference a TNG episode, but not the greatest Star Trek movie of all time, next to Galaxy Quest. Really?
well, hang on. There were new effects also created for the Mare Obscura Nebula, and some new effects for this one as well. But yes, the original Nebula footage, that very first, the proto-Nebula footage, as it were, for Star Trek, originates all the way back to the Wrath of Khan. And let's see, we have another reuse here. We have the Arboretum set, which we first saw in Data's Day. And Ken, you might recall that I got really excited when Wesley had a Franklin Mint model of the Enterprise on his desk in The First Duty, right? Yes. Big moment for me as a collector. Well, I might have actually gotten more excited to spot a model of Maria from Metropolis on Clara's nightstand. So it kind of goes by quickly, but if you see it, it's just right back there plain as day, and there's the robot Maria from Metropolis, and another all-time favorite movie. So we have a lot of guest stars here to talk about. Of course, we welcome back Brian Bonsall as Alexander for a little scene. We have Patty Yasutake as Alyssa Ogawa. Whoopi Goldberg was almost not in this episode. The scenes with her in 10 Forward with Data were originally written for Deanna Troi and Dr. Crusher. Then Guinan and Troi, the final script changes were made just a few days before filming those moments. And now on to the guest stars who are new. Shay Astar is Isabella. You've probably seen Shay before. She has worked pretty consistently since the early 90s. She had a recurring role on China Beach, and then on The Good Life, and Third Rock from the Sun. She's made guest appearances on Cold Case, Shameless, ER, and Quantum Leap, among others. We also have Jeff Allen as Daniel Sutter. Now, Jeff had some bit parts on the TV series Petrocelli in the 70s, but he found more steady roles in the 80s after appearing in Remo Williams and guest roles on shows like The Facts of Life, St. Elsewhere, Santa Barbara, L.A. Law, and yes, Moonlighting.
Yes.
He was in one of the Alien Nation TV movies, and you'll also find him in an upcoming episode of Voyager. And he was one of the actors in Star Trek Borg, the CD-ROM game, which I could never get to work right in my computer. We also have Noli Thornton as Clara Sutter. Noli was 8 years old when she shot this episode of TNG. And already she had appeared on a few TV shows, and she had a small part in Albert Brooks's Defending Your Life. She had the title role in the TV miniseries Heidi, starring Jason Robards, and she had a recurring role on Beverly Hills 90210. After a few more jobs, she stepped away from professional acting by 1998, but we will see her again in a different role in an episode of Deep Space Nine.
The thing to remember about Isabella, she is actual size, though she seems much bigger to Clara. Clara has never known anybody like her. She is actual size. As she flies away.
Prologue. A young girl, Clara, is talking with Counselor Troy about her friend Isabella. She's the daughter of career Starfleet guy Ensign Sutter. Clara's the daughter, not Isabella. Isabella is imaginary, and Ensign Sutter is worried about that. Troy sees no reason to be, though. The Sutters have moved from ship to ship to ship. Isabella has provided a constant companion for Clara. Give her time. She'll make real friends, and likely leave her imaginary world behind. Meanwhile, the Enterprise is checking out FGC-47, a nebula formed around a neutron star. It'll provide lots of science to science. And yet with all of this sciencing, no one notices the freeloading energy being that just Tinkerbelled its way onto the ship. It checks out people and places and things. It ends up in the Arboretum where Clara Sutter is helping plant nasturtiums. It pokes through the plants, passes through Clara's brain, and once out of her brain takes the human form of Isabella, Clara's imaginary friend. Act 1. Isabella is real, which is weird to Clara. Though the new kid looks exactly the way Clara described her to Counselor Troy, Clara's never actually seen Isabella before. Isabella wants to explore the Enterprise. Clara says they shouldn't, but Isabella, easily a minute and a half old, is awesome at the whole peer pressure thing. And off they go. In engineering, Geordi, Data, and Ensign Sutter are talking over what Nebula FGC-47 should actually be called when the Enterprise seems to hit something. Something that is, of course, not there. Except it must be. It's slowing down the Enterprise. Geordi's checking things out and nearly trips over Clara Sutter. She tells her father that Isabella, who is nowhere in sight, wanted to see engineering, though he says now's really not the time. In the hall, Clara asks Isabella why she keeps disappearing. Isabella says since the grown-ups don't believe she exists, she has to be invisible when they're around. She then tells Clara to wait a moment, disappears, and fixes whatever was slowing down the Enterprise. Task complete, Isabella and Clara walk off, hand in hand. Act 2. So, yeah. Geordi and Data tell Picard and Riker, we didn't hit something, but we did. And we didn't fix anything, but it's fixed. They decide to stay in the vicinity and investigate. Clara and Isabella are discussing the nature of their relationship. Isabella seems uncertain on this whole best friend thing, what it is, how it works, whether everyone has one. Since Clara made up Isabella, she says their friendship came easy. Now, they're racing to a place with lots of people. What they didn't expect was to bump into Lieutenant Commander Worf, which means Isabella didn't have time to disappear. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Go to your quarters. Of course, the second Worf is gone, they continue the way they were going. In engineering, science! And childhood. Sutter asked Geordi what it was like growing up moving from post to post to post with parents in Starfleet. Geordi says kids are tough. As long as they know you love them, they can handle whatever life throws at them. The place Clara decides to take Isabella, the place with lots of people, is 10 Forward. Of course, with lots of grown-ups around, Isabella is invisible again. Guinan explains that 10 Forward is usually just for adults, but since she brought Isabella, Clara and Isabella can be her guest. Guinan gets the whole imaginary friend thing. She used to have one, a Tarkasian razor beast. Sounds scary to Clara, and Guinan agrees. It was scary. but it was also a good friend. Somewhere along the way, Guinan must have dropped a dime on Clara because Counselor Troi comes in and is not surprised at all to find an 8-year-old sitting at the bar in 10 forward. Leaving the bar, Troi explains that 10 forward is for grown-ups. Clara says she knows that, but Isabella wanted to see it. Troi says Clara can't let Isabella get her in trouble, so Troi gives the invisible Isabella a talking to. It's not nice to get Clara in trouble. Next time you want to go someplace, ask an adult. Clara's invisible friend has Clara relay a message back to Troi. You better leave us alone. So, Troi has some new concerns for Ensign Sutter. This Isabella thing is taking an ugly turn. I'd like to get Clara involved with friends who are, not imaginary. Also, I'd like you to get more involved. Let her know she has someone she can talk to who's, not imaginary. In the Sutter quarters, Isabella says she doesn't like grown-ups. Also, she's bored hanging out in the quarters. She'd like to see engineering again. Clara says they can't, and Isabella starts in again with the peer pressure. The exchange is interrupted by a chime at the door. Counselor Troi would like to take Clara to a ceramics class, and the invisible Isabella is not invited. When Troi and Clara leave, a visible Isabella is visibly angry. Her eyes turn from blue to red. So if you hadn't picked up that Isabella was creepy and scary, that ought to do it. Act 3. Moving further into the nebula, the Enterprise has hit something that's slowing it down again. Except again, there seems to be nothing there. Except there is. In engineering, Geordi and Sutter have found a way to change sensors to sense what's dragging the Enterprise. Sutter suspects it's a whole series of some sort of energy strands. If they do the sensor thing outside the ship, they should be able to see what they're up against. Or what's up against them. Riker says, do it up! In Clara's ceramics class, oh good, Alexander's here. He's working on a cup for his father. At first, Clara's helping him, though Troi suggests Clara get some clay of her own. On the bridge, they've done the sensor thing, and holy cow, the Enterprise is surrounded on all sides and in every direction by the energy strands Sutter suspected was there. In her quarters, something's kind of bugging Troi. Like knocking over a cup bugging her. Like repeatedly doing that. It's odd. Back in ceramics, things seem to be going well with Alexander and Clara, though as soon as his back is turned, his cup is destroyed. Clara says it was Isabella, but Alexander sees no Isabella. It must have been Clara. Of course, it can't have been Clara who hit Alexander in the back of the head with a ball of clay, but we're already out of the classroom by the time that happens. Clara's back in the Arboretum, and there's Isabella. Clara is now completely freaked out by Isabella, and she should be. Isabella says she liked Clara and had planned to protect her when the others came to kill everyone. But now, she doesn't care. Also, she does the red eye thing again. Act 4. It's going to take the Enterprise about 12 minutes to get out of the nebula, except it's going to take a lot longer than that. They keep hitting strands, which keep slowing them down. Troi and Guinan are talking over the Sutter situation when Ensign Sutter calls Troi to his quarters. Clara won't go into her room. She's now completely frightened by Isabella. She tells Troi that Isabella said the others, being like Isabella, are going to come and kill everyone. Time to call it what it is. Troi tells Clara that her imaginary friend can't hurt anyone because she's, imaginary. Clara says, yes, she used to be, but she's real now. I can see her. Troi suggests that she and Clara go into Clara's room to make sure it's safe. Of course it's not. After a condescending look around the room led by Troi, Isabella finally appears and sort of force punches Troi unconscious. Act 5. So, yeah, says Troi to Picard and Crusher and Sutter, this thing's real. Sutter tells the captain about the threats Isabella's been making, about killing everybody. Come to think of it, says Worf, I saw Clara with the new girl 2 days ago. So there's been an alien on the ship for at least 2 days. Clara says she thinks she hurt Isabella's feelings, that she only turned mean when Clara started ignoring her. Picard says he hopes they can rely on Clara's help. Back on the bridge, the Enterprise is hitting more and more strands. The ship has to come to a stop, or be destroyed. Also, remember that Tinkerbell thing from the prologue? Yeah, there's a whole swarm of those now, feeding off the energy in the Enterprise shields. Time to call in the big guns, by which I mean the little girl. Picard and the other adults accompany Clara to the Arboretum, the first place Isabella appeared. Isabella won't present herself this time, though when Clara says she's scared, Isabella finally does show up. She tells Picard that she's there to determine whether the Enterprise is a threat to her people. Also, boy, oh boy, is the Enterprise producing some tasty energy. Picard says he can make more energy. They needn't be destroyed, though Isabella says they should be destroyed. Look how cruel they are to their children. And Picard gets it. The alien has seen everything through the eyes of a child. He explains, they're not being mean. They're helping the children grow, to survive growing up. They make rules for that. Clara will do the same when she has kids someday. Clara asks Isabella not to hurt them. If she still wants to be best friends, they can be. And with that, Isabella disappears, as do the energy strands that were holding the Enterprise. Picard has a parting gift for the beings in the nebula, an hour of pure, uncut energy. In her quarters, Clara sees Isabella one last time. Isabella apologizes for scaring Clara. She never had a friend before. Each says they hope they'll see each other again, which takes us to the end.
Dude, Isabella literally is Clara's only friend. She's not her only friend, but she's a little glowing friend, but really, she's not actually her friend, but she is.
But she is, yeah. Yeah.
But she is. Yeah.
I see what you did there. It's cute. I've got every song that they've ever recorded in my head now.
Yep. That's my little gift to you.
That's Procol Harum, right?
Right. So close.
Those guys will be big someday. They might be giants. You never can tell. All right, so I got a question for you. Sure. Did you have an imaginary friend when you were a kid?
Yeah, his name is Rod.
I love that people think we know him. That's so awesome.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's so weird. Yeah.
I love that people think there is one. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. No, I did. Now, I don't remember much, but I remember talking to my grandmother about that imaginary friend.
Really?
I just remember that was a thing that happened, but I don't remember really any details. I mean, I must have been, 5? I don't know.
I don't remember whether I had one or not. I honestly don't think I did, but my little brother, who is technically my half-brother, is 10 years younger than I am.
Okay.
And so I distinctly remember his imaginary friend. Which is kind of, and it kind of got me wondering, did we all have them and we just sort of forget them as time goes on? But I seriously, like you're saying, you remember talking to your grandmother about yours. I do not remember ever having an imaginary friend nor talking about one. Yeah.
Wow.
My little brother, on the other hand, had a cowboy.
Okay.
He went to the rodeo one time, and he came back, and this cowboy rode in the car with them. Not really, as far as I know. Maybe he was an invisible cowboy. I can't say, but yeah, Jim was the cowboy's name. I'll leave out his last name because he actually was a real rodeo cowboy. So I'm not going to be all like, yeah, this rodeo cowboy was hanging out with my little brother, because it's not true. but it was at the same time. I don't know. I got nothing here. I was just wondering if we all had them and I've just forgotten mine, or if some people do and some people don't.
Well, essentially, I've got some research about imaginary friends that I'll talk about in the next segment. But just to kind of plant the idea here, from what I've read, it seems like upwards of 2/3 of kids at one point or another have an imaginary friend. Now, the complexity that they take on, you're talking about a much smaller group of children who have very complex imaginary friends with, growing to the extent of having literally imaginary friends that occupy imaginary towns, where they have imaginary governments, where they have imaginary holidays. It's incredibly complex. But one of the stories that I read about was a researcher talking about a kid who, I guess, told a parent, about his or her friend. And the friend had a normal name, Billy or whatever. And then it later became apparent that this was an imaginary friend, that, in talking to people at the school, that this kid didn't exist. But one of the tip-offs for that was that this kid lived on a giraffe farm. And somewhere in the United States. And they assumed that, probably near where they lived for their school system, there was likely not a giraffe farm where they were. So that was probably a good indication. But again, very, very vivid imagination for this kid. I got to figure, and maybe I'm blowing the thing you're going to talk about next segment, I don't know. But I got to figure a lot of them are actually grown of once we start having thoughts in our heads. If we can't quite identify that's a thought that I'm having, then it's like, oh, well, I must be talking to somebody about that. Yeah. I better quick make somebody up. Right. Or else I'm just, I'm a prophet. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some stuff in the episode here. This is such a minor, just blow off scene, but I have to say that I'm uncomfortable at how uncomfortable the conversation is between Dr. Crusher and Nurse Ogawa, where Ogawa's talking about going on vacation with her man. I don't know why. It shouldn't be an uncomfortable conversation, and I shouldn't be uncomfortable watching it, but man, is it just uncomfortable. Like, they're trying to play it for humor. Yes. And it's not working. No, it's not. I mean, you said it's an inconsequential scene, so inconsequential that I left it out of the recap because, I mean, it's something that's happening in the background while Tinkerbell is tinkering around the ship, trying to figure out, where it's going to manifest. And I guess maybe it tells us a bit more about Nurse Ogawa, but I don't feel like it tells us, I mean, unless this is going to be a thing for her from now on, it didn't really tell us anything that I cared to know about Nurse Ogawa. Like, why is she being forced to talk about stuff that she doesn't want to talk about in the workplace? I know. Maybe it actually tells us more about Dr. Crusher than I want to know, come to think of it. Hey, lay off. All right. Exactly. No, seriously, you need to, have you been to Holodeck 4? Have you taken him to Holodeck 4? It just, didn't feel right. For a moment there, when the glowing ball of energy becomes a flower, I wonder if it might have just thought it would stay like that for a while, because it was really fast. It's a flower, and then it's not a flower, and then poof, it's gone. And I just thought, if it's there, the flower, it could just be like, hey, this is great. I smell good. People water me. I got nothing else to worry about at all. And this ship is great. Carry on, guys. I'll invite everybody to come over here and be flowers. Here's the thing, though. It has been a long time since any kind of plant was able to take over the Enterprise. Yeah. We're not at Omicron Ceti 3 here, pal. We're in the middle of a nebula, and I think if they're going to feed off the ship's energy, they're going to have to find a more cunning disguise than a plant. Well, an arboretum might be a good place to do that. You got light, you got all that stuff around. Yeah, that's true. Plus, everybody does seem to go to the arboretum. Yeah, everybody. Yeah. Again, I mean, not to bring up the holodeck too much, but you got holodecks. You got at least 4 holodecks. You've got observation lounges, but everybody's like, but I want that like little tenth of an acre of grass. Let's go there. Let's take a walk through the arboretum. Let's take an incredibly slow walk through the arboretum. Yeah. Because seriously, you can cross the arboretum in like 3 seconds, maybe 5. Yeah. There is so much 47 in this episode. Yeah. So much 47. The name of the nebula, and it's the number in millions of plasma energy strands or something hanging out in that nebula. This is all the 47s everywhere. Introduction in this episode to a new prop, space smocks. Yes. Well, smocks. They're space smocks. They're not just smocks. There was a space fork. The chocolate cake that Deanna wasn't eating, she was not eating it with a space fork. She was poking at it with a space fork. That's true. And Deanna used a space towel to clean up the hot chocolate mess. Her spacey hot chocolate, I would guess. Well, maybe. Yeah, we didn't get a good look at that hot chocolate to see if it was spacey, but it was definitely a space towel. I could tell. You know, it's weird. In a time of replicators of plenty, and we've talked about sort of like the catalog store, we can just go in and punch up whatever. Kids are still making crappy things for their parents. Oh my gosh. Okay, look, I feel bad. I felt bad when I jotted this down, and I feel bad as I'm about to say it.
I did not.
I'm not going to besmirch Alexander. I have a lot of sympathy for Alexander. I think he's a good kid in a bad situation. But it took him 2 weeks to make an incomplete, crappy cup. He needs to step up his game. That is not a cup made with honor.
That is no. It's made with plenty of honor. But I'm guessing. For that cup to have taken him 2 weeks, he has to be allowed to only work on it for 3 minutes at a time every other day. And look, I have, some of the crappy stuff that I made for my mom when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And it's not the highest quality. Right. But I do know that it only took me an afternoon. And it was actually a little bit more complex than what Alexander was making for his dad there. I also couldn't help thinking, and this is terrible, and you're usually the one who's really hard on Worf. And I'm not being hard on Worf in this. I just kind of wonder what Worf's reaction would have been had he actually been handed that cup. And I'm not saying it would have been bad. It might have been great. It might have been wonderful. It might have been the perfect fatherly reaction. Yeah. I mean, I want to know, first of all, how he actually would have acted. And second, I'd really love to know what he was actually thinking.
Right?
I think Isabella actually did Alexander a world of favors in making sure that Worf was never handed that chalice.
I think you're right. Although maybe, as far as we know, it's going to be another 2 weeks, just day and night, Alexander sitting in that room trying to make that cup. Poor kid. Wow. Yeah. Well, hey, at least at the end of the episode, of all people, it's Picard who gets to give the speech about being sensitive to seeing the world from the child's point of view. Mm-hmm. It's Picard who gives that speech. It's Picard who gives the speech. But it totally works. It totally works. Picard reasoned with a child.
Well, a child who wasn't actually a child. They were just sort of like, trapped in a child's body. Which
plasma string.
Kind of got to figure is how Picard felt the whole time he was a child. I don't know that, really, talking to an actual child, I don't think is necessarily his forte. But if he can talk to a child as an adult, then, it's Picard all day long.
Why? Why did they send Isabella over anyone else? How should Clara react? These things happen to other people. They do not happen at all, in fact.
So, did you like this episode better when it was called The Child?
Tell me the connection between the two, because I'm honestly having trouble seeing it.
Sure. Well, a disembodied, glowing light being decides to manifest itself as a human child in order to become a part of the Enterprise crew, at least for a little bit. Now, granted, in The Child, that child was a little more benevolent and caring and had a relationship with Deanna. This time it was we don't know how old that being was, but potentially going to destroy the Enterprise. So now their dispositions might have been a bit different, but I feel like kind of the point of view had already been done. Disembodied, light, glowing thing becoming a child. We learned something from it, and it learned something from us.
Well, except Ian actually wanted to find out what it was like to be human. I mean, Isabella was there more. I'm sorry, Ian was the child in The Child. Right. When, for people who don't remember, that's the thing that comes in and impregnates basically Counselor Troy and grows up as her kid over the course of a day and a half, maybe two. Isabella was sent basically as recon, right? Isabella's a bit more like the episode, which was the one with the proto-Vulcans?
Who Watches the Watchers?
Who Watches the Watchers? Isabella's more like that, right? Except more intrusive. We're not trying to be the proto-Vulcans when we go to that planet. We're just trying to study their society. Although we're not trying to figure out if they're going to be, a threat to us. I mean, Isabella is really just there to assess risk, and then she finds resources that she can exploit. That's really what they come down to. So I see the very beginning part of what you're saying. But I mean, that's almost like talking about any human. It's like, I like John better when he was called Gandhi.
Didn't we all?
How are they the same? Well, they were both born. Well, yeah. I mean, no offense, but I sort of see what you're saying, but they're so different to me that they didn't strike me as that similar at all.
Really, it just kept gnawing away at the back of my mind when I was watching this. I don't know. Yeah, maybe because, and that kind of comes to the end then, just which as a judgment call I liked better or found more intriguing.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, the way we do our show, everything's kind of compressed, where we're watching, week after week after week, and we don't have that separation of time. So the child feels like it was almost yesterday, even though it's at the beginning of season 2, and here we are quickly approaching the end of season 5.
My goodness.
So Data is speaking right to my cold, analytical, skeptical heart. I'll compress this quote a little bit. People try to find meaningful patterns in things that are essentially random, sometimes suggesting what they're thinking about at that particular moment. Besides, it's clearly a bunny rabbit. That was pretty great. It was, it was the perfect Data humor.
Yes.
It was nice.
It was. Yeah. There were a couple of things. I mean, yes, there were one or two things about that bothered me, like, does a nebula really change that fast? Because they're looking at the same thing and seeing the different shapes. But as you say, maybe they're just looking at it and making their own shapes as they go. And this is another thing that I left out of the recap, kind of like the Nurse Ogawa thing, because it seemed inconsequential. Though perhaps it was a message to even the coldest, most analytical, and most skeptical heart, John.
Hey,
to hold on to the kind of wonder that we'd have had as children. Kind of goes back to the question that it's amazing to me that you actually, I really do wonder now if I did have an imaginary friend. It's amazing to me that you remember having an imaginary friend, but you don't remember the friend himself or herself. I didn't ask.
Yeah. The majority of kids, they said that when people forget their imaginary friends, it happens pretty quickly, and they said that the lifespan is about 2 years. So that if you talk to a kid who had an imaginary friend and they're in the process of forgetting or losing that imaginary friend, give it about 2 years, and most people won't remember. They won't even remember that they had one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is just so mind-boggling. Mm-hmm. So then what do you make of the fact that Guinan's like 200-something years old, right?
Maybe more.
She still has her imaginary friend.
Yeah, does she? So here's the thing. Does she or did she?
She says that she still does. When she's talking to Troy about it, the indication is that she still talks to whatever kind of razor beast it was. Tarkasian?
Yeah. Oh, well, you're good.
Is that right?
Good.
Wow.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It sounds close anyway. But yeah, she says that she still talks to it.
Because when she's talking to Clara, she puts everything in the past tense. I made sure that I went back and watched that.
Yes.
Again. But when she's talking to Troy, you're right. I kept wondering what they were trying to indicate with that.
It's the magical wonder that is Guinan. I mean, sometimes that's really useful, and sometimes it almost feels like filler.
Right.
I'm sorry. Is that? I apologize. Is that cold, analytical, and skeptical?
No, I think it's totally accurate. I mean, sometimes it is as filler. I mean, remember, they didn't know that they were going to have Guinan in this episode. So then it feels like, well, we've got her. Whoopi's schedule is open, so we'll just try to work in another moment. Hey, what if she had an imaginary friend, and maybe still does?
All right.
I wondered if Deanna should be doing a better job as an empath to figure out Clara's emotional state surrounding the imaginary friend. And maybe this is just a minor bone to pick with the episode, but she says to Ensign Sutter that Clara might be lonely. She might be trying to work something out because they go from ship to ship, and the life of a Starfleet officer, as we know, is very orphan-like, But shouldn't she know? Shouldn't she be able to see exactly what's going on?
Well, who wants to go to a counselor who's a know-it-all, though? I mean, I think I believe we've actually talked about, I know we've talked about it with like some orders that are given, and we've talked about it with some sort of like thought processes that people have to go through. Troy has to lead Ensign Sutter to this moment. She can't. Yeah. Because if he comes in and, she's basically like, the all-knowing, whatever, demigod of the ship.
Oh, sure.
Then it just becomes a series of like of steps that he has to follow, like I don't know, like saying the Hail Mary, or some kind of like, just do this, just do this, just do this, and everything will be fine. he's got to sort of find his way through the whole thing, right? He's got to come to an understanding of it as opposed to just being handed a checklist of do that and you're done.
Sure. Although it seems, I don't know, he seems like he needs to be led a little bit, Like he's not a bad father, but
right.
he's a little preoccupied with work, and he's a little annoyed maybe that he's got to deal with this at home. I think maybe he could use a little bit of hand-holding. There's one thing for Deanna to say, well, she might find it difficult to make friends. Maybe Deanna needs to say, you've been traveling around a lot. She doesn't have any friends here. Mm-hmm. Go do some stuff that involves some other kids.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Geordi will give you the time off. So put the work on Ensign Sutter, but maybe give him a little more clear-cut path as to how to do it.
See, actually, I honestly felt okay about the way she got him to that point, and I also felt like she stepped up a lot when when they first show up. It's like, okay, well, I can see why this would bother you, but here's maybe why she's doing that. So maybe you try to get more involved, and then we'll see how this whole thing plays out. When the thing plays out then to her, as far as anybody knows, imaginary friend, taking her to places that are either inappropriate or potentially dangerous, and also threatening her, at that point, Troy thinks that there is something going on psychologically, and so she doesn't say, so what do you think's going on? At that point, she steps in and says, okay, so here's what's going on, and here's what we're going to do. Right? I think she's not just trying to counsel Clara past whatever. Remember, she was doing family counselor with Worf and Alexander just a couple of episodes ago, I guess. Mm-hmm. So this isn't just about, taking your kid and getting them fixed. It's about, sort of growing a healthy family unit. And so that you can't just hand dad something and say, here, this will fix it. You kind of have to get him involved as well, unless we're going back to, the Enterprise of the 1960s. In which case, we're not even going to worry about how the kids are doing. We're just going to make them cry because that's better. And, hopefully some lawyer in a shower curtain doesn't come and ruin everything for everyone.
That would be the worst.
And yet, at the same time, kind of the best.
Yeah. I do think that Deanna makes a good point in talking to Guinan about her worry. The moment that you mentioned where she's got a space fork and she's just poking at that cake and we don't know if she's going to eat it or not, that's really a lot of dramatic tension for that scene. But anyway, she's saying to Guinan that she's worried about maybe taking away that creativity from Clara. And I think that's a good, honest moment, because I'm sure that many parents have wondered the same thing. It's like, well, my kid believes this kind of weird fantasy thing, and maybe it's time to sort of disabuse them of that piece of fantasy, but at the same time, it's just a kid having fun. Where do you draw the line? I think it's a good, realistic moment for her.
You see, all that kind of goes out the window, though, because we know that Clara is, for all intents and purposes, being haunted. Or, she's being led around by this poltergeist or this energy being or this, this alien or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So, I understand what you're saying, and I understand, her point of contention, but I honestly didn't even consider it that much because we know that there actually is a bad guy. Mm-hmm. I would think, trying to get her to, like, maybe in the ceramics class, she could make a sculpture of Clara or Isabella, or maybe she could write something about her or draw pictures of her or something like that. Which actually, come to think of it, didn't Deanna say, can you draw a picture for me? Yep. And I think Clara said she could, and yet no crayons. So right. She described her. Right. I know that. There might have been a way to, I don't know. I honestly didn't get too hung up on that because I knew, it's been revealed to us early on that, this is real. Although I did still kind of wonder right up until they bumped into Worf. I guess we saw the thing coming in, but I thought they might have played it out a bit longer. I thought we might have actually still wondered. I thought there might have been a little bit more mind bleepery. Once they bump into Worf and he acknowledges both of them, then it's like, okay, so there's going to be no mystery for us. And in case there was going to be any mystery for us, no, it's clear. Yeah, this is actually a thing. I might have enjoyed the mind bleepery more, but that's just because, well, we can talk about that in a minute.
Sure thing. So I mentioned earlier imaginary friends, the idea of that being a psychological thing. So I wanted to look it up. I wanted to find out a little more. And having remembered watching this episode, and I'm glad you posed that question, did I have an imaginary friend? Yeah, and like I said, I can't remember much about it other than just that was a thing. I remember a conversation with my grandmother talking about an imaginary friend, and that's about the extent of it. So I wanted to find out what does sort of modern psychology say about imaginary friends. So oddly enough, interestingly enough, there is a place at the University of Oregon under the direction of psychologist Marjorie Taylor called the Imagination Lab. And it is dedicated to studying imaginary friends, but more specifically, or more generally, I should say, child's imaginations. So what is it that makes the imagination of kids different? And I thought that was just fascinating. This is a thing. And Marjorie Taylor has been doing this for more than 30 years, making this her life's work, and then the University of Oregon backing it. And some of the highlights of what I found in her research, if you Google the Imagination Lab, you'll find quite a lot. She's got a book called Imaginary Feelings, which you can look up in your spare time. So some of the things that I thought were interesting that she talked about. So it had been considered that kids who have imaginary friends are more intelligent, but she said that's actually not a thing, that imaginary friends run the gamut with kids and all levels of intelligence, all backgrounds, and it's a pretty good chunk of those kids who do have imaginary friends. There was a line here that I thought was really interesting that I mentioned earlier. Over the course of her research, Taylor has noticed that children who had imaginary friends as preschoolers sometimes move on to developing an entire imaginary world or paracosm. Worlds typically elaborate, entailing their own geography, transportation systems, governments, and holidays. I thought that was fascinating. Just absolutely incredible. A typical age range is about 3 to 8 years old, but sometimes it goes way beyond that, actually into teen years. Not as often, not as prevalent, but the sweet spot is about 3 to 8 years old. And she talks about how, a lot of parents are worried about this, but really it's not a thing to be worried about. And the other thing that I thought was very interesting is that in her research, she said that a lot, if not most of the kids, know that their imaginary friend is imaginary. So in conversations with them, the kids will say something along the lines of, well, this is fake, or this is make-believe, right? But they keep going with the description and the fantasy of what they're doing with their imaginary friend. And the other place that her research is leading right now is imaginary versus virtual friends, which I thought was interesting. The more and more technologically advanced we get, that kids are sort of augmenting the idea of imaginary friends with virtual friends. And she talks about an experiment done with a plush dog, so just like a little stuffed animal dog, versus a virtual dog. And she said that the kids would be more entertained by the virtual dog, but if they wanted something that felt sort of protective and companionate, then they would go for the plush animal rather than the virtual. And as you might suspect, there's clearly a lot more of this in her book, but one of the many aspects of imaginary friends has to do with kids expressing their true feelings through their friends. So you kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, but absolutely the idea is that a child can let the friend be the conduit for what it is they're actually feeling and express themselves through something that the friend does. And I think we definitely see that early on with Clara. Of course, it goes a little bit off the rails when we introduce Isabella as a real alien being. But yes, that is one of the things that's going on with Clara, is Isabella expressing Clara's feelings for her.
I wish this episode had taken place around a sun, instead of in a nebula. The sun is a massive incandescent gas, a gigantic nuclear furnace, where hydrogen is built into helium, at a temperature of millions of degrees.
would imagine you're wondering what part of the show we're up to now. Well, this is the part where your podcast pals, John and Ken, who may or may not be real, take apart this episode of Star Trek for messages, morals, and meanings and try to decide for themselves and all their imaginary friends whether this episode actually holds up. I put the question to you, Mr. Champion. Imaginary friend, does this episode hold up as far as you're concerned?
Well, okay. So I feel like I've already said what I'm about to say. And there are a few episodes where this comes up, where we start to hear from people in the weeks leading up, and they're like, oh, man, you got this one coming up. Wow, good luck with that, eye roll. Mm-hmm. And I get that, and I always say every week that we try to approach the episode without any of that in our minds. We really want to start from scratch and just take the episode on its own merits. So let me tell you the things that I like about this episode first, that I really like about it. Twilight Zone, and you know that I'm a fan of Twilight Zone, does all kinds of episodes about creepy kids or things that seem innocent that aren't. And I really dig those kinds of stories. I think that's kind of a cool trend or meme in that kind of show. I also think that it's a cool idea to focus on someone that we don't know in an episode from time to time. This probably would have been a terrible episode and too much too soon if this were about Alexander having an imaginary friend, just because he sort of became the kid on the Enterprise after we lost Wesley, and Wesley's a bit too old for this, I hope. I also like that this is kind of a classic Star Trek story, where the enemy is simply the misunderstood. Mm-hmm. So, and by doing that, you blend the A and B plots, obviously, but nicely. However, all those good motivations and all those right decisions don't completely come together here. I think we probably need more of our main cast, but I don't know how exactly you do that and still focus on the little girl. And clearly the script had been written and rewritten so many times that I'm sure that they struggled with exactly that same question. And even though this show has pieces of classic Trek in its message, that feels like too little too late. We've seen aliens before that don't understand humans, that judge us quickly and then have to be talked down. I don't mind those stories. I really don't. Star Trek does them very well. This just isn't one of the better ones. So I'll say this. It doesn't really hold up as a production. It doesn't hold up as a show. But it was definitely better than I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. So I'll give it that. I think there's a real effort here. I think there are a lot of good ideas here, and I think there are a lot of good decisions that just didn't quite play out. And sometimes when you're making, more than 100 episodes of a TV show, not every element is going to fire on all cylinders. So, yeah, it's too bad. This could have been better, or at least the ideas here could have been explored better. But I'll give them at least some credit for the efforts behind it. How about you?
What's weird is I actually liked it better on subsequent viewings than I did the first time I watched it for this show. The first time it just felt way too after-school special to me. And it is very after-school special. And we can get into ways that it's very after-school special in a moment. But it just way is. Didn't stop being that the more I watched it. But maybe like once I realized just how after-school special it was, I was able to kind of let go of that part. And have that not bother me quite as much. Once I know that it's a wasted hour of Star Trek, and it's not completely wasted, but once I know that it's like, okay, well, it turns out I don't like it, but then I'm able to watch it more easily, I think, in a way. I gotta say, Brian Bonsall is terrible in this episode. He is terrible in this episode. He is horrible.
Wow, you're taking this out on Brian Bonsall.
No, I'm not taking the episode out on him. I'm saying he's terrible in this episode. He's actually done some good acting before, and what's weird is the kid who plays Clara is fantastic. Sweet to the point of saccharine. The kid who played Isabella, does creepy amazingly well. Like, like well enough that I'm checking under the bed later tonight.
Right.
And so I don't know if it is just everybody thought, well, okay, Brian's got this because he knows how to do this, or if they really tried to direct him, or if they just figured, well, he's on screen for 5 minutes. I mean, you've got good acting from kids here, and you've actually had okay acting from Brian Bonsall before. Boy, just not in this episode. To the point that I kind of wish it hadn't even been him, honestly. Because if it had been some other bad actor kid, I'd be like, oh, who's the bad actor kid? But, Brian Bonsall, come on, dude, seriously. It's been like 7 or 8 years. I really feel like not enough attention was paid to his performance. I don't know why that is. You're hard on Worf. I'm hard on Alexander. Maybe that's it. I don't know.
All right, fair enough.
The Nebula is gorgeous. TNG has Tinkerbell down. So, I mean, with the exception of the Brian Bonsall thing, and also 2 weeks on that cup, I feel like the production was fine. I actually like the effects, the plasma string effects, whatever that was.
Yeah, it was quite good.
It's a pretty great effect. So, I mean, as far as the production itself goes, I would actually say it's good. Even the different lighting, like when they're looking out the window at that nebula, that was gorgeous. I mean, both in 10 Forward and in the observation lounge when they're having the meeting. I mean, it really is. I mean, production-wise, I would say that this... and they found a really creepy kid. No less creepy because they've dressed her like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's. I think production-wise, you'd have to say, yeah, it works. Unless you're going to count the writing.
Right.
In which case, then you may have a bit of an issue. It does hammer its messages, though. Speaking of which, sir, do you want to say which ones you found?
Sure. I mean, I think I kind of start off with a message about peer pressure.
Yeah. You can almost end there as well.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Clara needs to not be so easily swayed by Isabella. And it's not such a bad thing to listen to adults every now and then. So, just... just stop listening to the imaginary or real friend, and not so bad if you have to bring this up with somebody in authority. And of course, there is truth in Guinan's conversation with Clara, that grown-ups sometimes lose the sense of play and imagination that they had as kids. And that's too bad, that shouldn't be the case, but that is kind of a recurrent theme throughout the episode. And I also do like... I think that ending with Picard is really clunky, just to bring him in. Like, we have not had him involved in this storyline with Clara and Isabella at all,
right,
other than just his being aware of it. But then you sort of very clunky bring him in at the end, like, oh, okay, now I'm here to wrap it up and give the speech. So I don't like the way that plays out, but I do really like one line that he has, that there is no better criterion to judge them than how they treat children.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly he says us, no better criterion to judge us, meaning humans and the people aboard the Enterprise, than how we treat our children. That's great. I think that's a terrific truth that pretty much applies everywhere. So I thought that was a nice little nugget of wisdom to take away from this. How about you? Anything else in here that you picked up?
Well, there was one thing that I don't know that it was... They weren't called on it, and so I kind of worry that it's there. I'll say what I'm going to say. I can't, because I can't think of how to sort of ease into it. I think adults are let off the hook a little too easily in this episode. Geordi basically tells Sutter, hey, kids are tough. You be a workaholic, and that's fine. Just make sure that your kids know, that you love them, and they'll be okay, because kids can take it. Because one size fits all, apparently. And
right.
and the thing that bothers me, there are a few things that bother me about this. Sutter is working with a counselor, right? Mm-hmm. So for goodness sake, turn to the workaholic whose best friend is a robot and whose best relationship was with, oh my goodness, an imaginary friend. I don't know that he's actually the person to turn to, and yet all this happens out of earshot. And okay, one size does not fit all. Maybe what Geordi is telling Sutter is okay advice for him to sort of, assimilate and fold in with everything else that he's working with.
Yeah.
But it's just sort of presented as, well, here's truth about, I grew up fine, so your kid will be fine too. Just do this one thing that my parents did. Right? And I'm kind of like, I was a little, I really felt like it was letting the viewing public off the hook to an extent. You spend 80 hours at work this week? That's okay. Just make sure your kid knows you love them. And it'll be fine. Well, maybe. Or maybe not.
That was a weird, that was a weird moment between them anyway, between Ensign Sutter and Geordi, because I felt like, sure, Ensign Sutter is opening up a little bit about his personal life and asking, well, did you ever have any problems like this? And you went from ship to ship and you did all that. So Geordi's like, no, I'm good. I had a great childhood. So
we don't even need to talk about it. That's how great my childhood was. In fact, why don't you get back to work?
Yeah, totally good. Must be something wrong with your kid or what you're doing as a parent.
I mean, honestly, I would have felt okay if it had been, them having a conversation, because Troy's done that before, where she'll bring in somebody else. I mean, go back to young Jeremy Astor. She wanted to bring Wes in to talk about what it was like to lose a parent and to grow up in that, in that environment. Or to grow up with that as a defining moment in your life. So, I mean, for her to have had this discussion with Sutter and Geordi would have actually maybe been decent. Because at the end of it, she could say, so maybe things will be fine. There are some things that we would want to watch out for. But, maybe it'll all be, maybe this is not a worry. See how well your friend Geordi turned out. In theory, that part honestly bothered me. The rest of it was very after school special, which I personally feel a little old for. But I mean, they're not bad lessons mostly. That one just kind of rubbed me wrong.
Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Executive producer Rod Roddenberry. You can find out more at roddenberry.com. That'll lead you to all kinds of good information about Roddenberry Entertainment, the Roddenberry Foundation, all the cool things that they are cooking up at Roddenberry. For more exciting Star Trek podcasts, check out Trek FM. That's trek.fm. And for the latest in Star Trek news and discussion, be sure to visit trekmovie.com.
Next week, Borg.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. Please get in touch with John and Ken. Operators are standing by, talking about their portrayal on the TV when an actress sits with a headset in outer space. End transmission.